Today, my girlfriend texted me saying she had no idea I had such a charming brother, and a twin, no less. Apparently, she stopped by my apartment, not knowing I was working late, and he was there to greet her. He introduced himself, offered her coffee, shared a few funny childhood stories, and even walked her to the elevator. I have no idea how to tell her that I don't have a brother. About 5 years ago, in the dead of night, I was jolted awake by 4 short rings at my door. Annoyed I didn't bother to get up, I wasn't expecting anyone. The next night, the ringing happened again. 4 short chimes. This time I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. It left me uneasy. The following day, I shared the story with some friends and joked that maybe death had gotten the wrong door. On the 3rd night, a friend of mine came over and stayed late. As we chatted, the doorbell rang again, 4 times. I decided to ignore it, curious to see if it was just my imagination. My friend, however, heard it clearly, and after I told him the story, laughed it off. "Let's see who these pranksters are," he said confidently and rushed outside. That was the last time I saw him. No, he didn't disappear. On his way home, he was attacked by a group of drunk men and later died in the hospital. After that night, the ringing stopped. I hadn't thought about it in years, but last night, deep in the silence, I heard 3 short rings at the door. One evening, a couple decided to go out to the movies, leaving their children in the care of a babysitter. The children were already tucked into bed, so the young woman's job was simple: stay in the house just in case. After a while, boredom crept in, and the babysitter decided to watch TV. She called the parents to ask for permission. Naturally, they agreed, but then she hesitated before making one more request. "Would it be okay if I covered the angel statue outside the window? It's making me nervous," she asked. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before the father finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Take the children and get out of the house. Now." "We don't have an angel statue." The babysitter hung up in panic and ran to the children's rooms, but it was too late. When the police arrived, they found everyone in the house dead. The angel statue was never found. A young photographer decided to spend a day and night alone in a remote forest. She wasn't afraid. She was an experienced camper and had done this many times before. Throughout the day, she wandered through the woods, capturing the beauty of the trees and grasses on her trusted film camera. As evening fell, she settled into her small tent and drifted off to sleep, comforted by the silence of nature. The night passed peacefully, and nothing unusual happened, or so she thought. Days later, as she developed the film, her excitement turned to sheer terror. The first few rolls were filled with stunning shots of the forest, as she had expected. But on the last frame of the final roll, her heart froze. The photo showed her, sound asleep in her tent, surrounded by the darkness of the forest night. Iman got lost in the woods. He wandered for hours, and as dusk fell, he stumbled upon a small cabin. The place seemed abandoned, and with no other options, he decided to stay the night. Inside, the cabin was eerily quiet. As he settled in, he noticed something unsettling. Portraits of people hung on the walls. Their faces looked sinister, their eyes seemingly following him wherever he moved. A chill ran down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Despite the unease, exhaustion eventually overcame him, and he drifted into a restless sleep. At dawn, he was awakened by the bright sunlight streaming into the room. Groggily, he sat up and rubbed his eyes. But what he saw made his heart freeze. There were no portraits on the walls. They had never been portraits. They were windows. A grandfather once shared a chilling story from his childhood with his granddaughter. As a boy, he and his siblings were sent to a forest to hide from the advancing German troops during the war. The adults decided to shelter the children in the forester's house deep in the woods, far from the danger approaching their small village. It was agreed that Baba Marfa, a kind elderly woman, would secretly bring food to them. But the children were strictly forbidden to return to the village under any circumstances. For weeks, they lived in the small house, surviving on the food Baba Marfa left for them each morning in the shed. At first, their parents would occasionally visit, but as time went on, their visits stopped. Every morning through the window, the children would watch Baba Marfa quietly approach the shed. She never spoke, only turned to look at them with a sorrowful gaze before crossing herself and leaving. One day, two men came to the house. They introduced themselves as partisans and urged the children to come with them. The men brought news that shook the children to their core. Their village had been burned to the ground a month ago. Everyone who remained, including Baba Marfa, had been killed, and yet for weeks she had been bringing them food. A high school student, bored during class, gazed out the window. His eyes fell on a photograph lying in the grass. Intrigued, he went outside during the break to pick it up. The picture showed a stunningly beautiful girl wearing a dress and red shoes, flashing a V sign with her fingers. Curious, he began asking everyone around if they knew her, but no one recognized the girl. That evening, captivated by the photo, he placed it on his bedside table before going to sleep. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by a faint sound, a scratching noise as though someone was gently clawing at his window. Heart pounding, he sat up and listened. Then he heard soft laughter, a woman's laugh coming from outside. Drawn by the sound, he stepped out into the cold night, clutching the photo in his hand. The laughter seemed to move further away, pulling him along. He followed it, the voice always just out of reach, until he found himself in the middle of the road, unaware of the danger. Suddenly, bright headlights blinded him. The driver didn't have time to stop. The collision was brutal, and the boy fell lifeless to the ground. Horrified, the driver jumped out of the car and rushed to help, but it was too late. As he knelt by the boy's side, something on the ground caught his eye. A photograph. It was a picture of a beautiful girl wearing a dress and red shoes. But this time, she wasn't holding up 2 fingers. She was holding up 3. It happened in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan. A group of 5 mountaineers had set up camp near a small mountain lake. Around midnight, they were all about to go to sleep when a strange noise came from the direction of the lake. A sound somewhere between laughter and crying. Curious and slightly unnerved, the group decided to investigate. When they reached the lake shore, they found nothing unusual, just the still water and the surrounding silence. But then they noticed an eerie mist rising from the lake, faintly glowing with white lights that seemed to beckon them closer. Drawn to the mysterious glow, the group began walking toward the mist. They had taken only a few steps when the last man in the group suddenly realized he was standing knee-deep in freezing water. Shocked, he grabbed the 2 closest friends and pulled them back to shore. It was then they realized how far they had wandered into the lake without noticing. But the other 2, the ones who had been leading the group, had vanished into the mist. No cries for help, no splashes, just silence. Frantic and desperate, the 3 remaining friends called out, but their voices were swallowed by the cold night air. With no way to find the missing pair in the icy darkness, they huddled at camp, waiting for dawn. At first light, they rushed down the mountain to get help. Rescuers arrived hours later, but there was no trace of the missing mountaineers. The lake was calm, the mist had vanished, and the glowing lights were nowhere to be seen. By evening, the 2 who had been pulled back from the mist fell ill. Their bodies grew cold despite the fire, and by nightfall, they were dead. No one ever found the missing climbers, and the lake remains a mystery, its whispers calling only to those who dare to listen.